Hello, all my friends in TV land. This is Senior Issues, etc., and I'm your host, Vita Verdon. Thank you for tuning in to our show. This is our veteran show, and our topic is going to be on Vietnam, and we're going to hear a lot of personal experiences about Vietnam, and we're welcoming back somebody who's been on the show. I think you were on in 2014, if I'm not correct. Allen Ayers. Nice to have you back on the show.
Nice to be back.
Now, we've grown quite a bit since the last time you were on the show, so if you look right in that camera and tell our friends out there in TV land a little bit about yourself, then we'll dig right into Vietnam.
So as Vita mentioned, I'm a Vietnam vet. I was over there as part of the Marine Corps in 1966 and 67. I had a somewhat different kind of experience in Vietnam because I was back at a major supply depot and I was operating one of the largest computers in Vietnam. So I was, as a lot of people have told me, I was kind of a pioneer in computing in the military, especially in the military so close to combat. But this was 1966. This was kind of pioneering on how to use computers in business applications.
That was just about the start of it, wasn't it?
I first got my computer training in 1962. I took my first computer course. And then when I was in the military at the time, but then I went back to college, thank you to the Marine Corps, and I got further computer training, and then was sent over to Vietnam to run this computer installation.
I know also, I like to mention that you are a veteran and you are a volunteer for Veterans Assistance. And you might tell our audience a little bit about Veterans Assistance.
Sure, be glad to. When I got back from Vietnam, I really didn't look back at all. I went into my civilian job and worked for 40 plus years without really thinking about the military at all. As I got closer to retirement, I met an Army sergeant who had spent 3 years in recovery after Afghanistan. And I began to get a sense that I needed to go back and do something to help out with vets that are coming back, especially vets that had needs today. And I experimented with several different things, but found myself ultimately at the Veterans Assistance Commission in Waukegan. The Veterans Assistance Commission is a county organization, and there's one in every county in Illinois. Our role is to help veterans with disability benefits and filing claims. My role there is to help vets to get jobs, either young vets coming back from just getting out of the military, or older vets who have been out of work for a while for assorted reasons and are looking to get back into the workforce. So that's part of my role there. You asked about the Veterans Assistance Commission relative to the Veterans Administration. One sentence about that. The Veterans Administration is federal government, and it's primarily oriented towards the medical care.
Oh, so one is the medical and it's federal, and the other is county, and it's like assistance in helping and assistance.
Yeah, now the Veterans Administration has two halves. It's the medical half, and then it's a benefit half. We work with the benefit half, and we help to file claims and speed the process for veterans when they have benefit issues.
So you're in assistance with them.
We're assisting the vets to deal with the Veterans Administration benefit side.
Okay, well, let's get back to your experience in the war in Vietnam and explain a little bit about the war in Vietnam.
The war was very interesting and I think challenging. I hadn't thought very much about it until fairly recently, but then I went back to Vietnam about a year and a half ago. So that would have been spring of 2016. And then recently the Ken Burns 10 episode series on Vietnam on public television, and it's gotten me kind of reflecting on the whole thing.
Well, there were so many different factors going on that it's hard to just focus on one.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things
Yeah.
I discovered, especially with the Ken Burns series.
Yes.
I was there early in the war. I was there in 1966
Maybe you
and
could
67.
explain the different factors.
Well, that's what I was going to do. And
Yeah.
when I was there, the Ken Burns series was oriented primarily towards combat in the first half.
Okay.
But in the second half of that series, he began to show much more of the struggles of different components, especially American components. We had the combat warriors. They had one perspective of the war. We had veterans in Vietnam, but they were behind the scenes, like myself, running the computer installation, running the supply depot, running hospitals, where they weren't in harm's way, at least most of the time. So they had a different perspective of the war.
Okay.
Then you had the military leadership in Vietnam. They had a perspective. You had the political leadership in Vietnam.
Well, I wanted to say there was more than the American political leadership. There was other leaderships involved.
Yes, there were.
The French had a big.
Well, that was early history.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, prior to the American War, and the
Right.
Vietnamese today refer to this as the American War.
The American war. Okay.
Prior to the Americans coming in the early 60s, the French had occupied Vietnam as a colony for almost 100 years. And I was going to talk about this later, but just to touch on it, what I discovered when I went back to visit was that the French influence was far greater in the grand scheme of things, in the museums and things, than the American war. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we when we look later.
Okay.
What I saw though, it was interesting to see the struggles, particularly in the American politics,
Okay.
starting back with JFK.
Yes.
And the struggle that the American presidents and their cabinetry had on why are we there? How do we get out? We can't get out. And it seemed like we were on this disastrous path that nobody could do anything about. We had committed to South Vietnam. And it was a long time before anybody began to think that South Vietnam was even the wrong side to be committed to. So the Ken Burns series was really interesting to see because it showed not just the American and the South Vietnamese perspective, but he also had interviews with the North Vietnamese. He explored the North Vietnamese leadership. He explored the Viet Cong and the Viet Cong leadership, as well as the American and South Vietnamese leadership. So it began to you began to see all this coming together, especially. I see a major turning point was the Tet Offensive in 1968, early 1968. It started close to the DMZ, and the biggest combat originally in that was in Hue, the city of Hue, which was also known as the Imperial City. It was a very historic city, badly damaged in the Tet Offensive. But the North Vietnamese had actually invaded, and that was when they started moving North Vietnamese army aggressively down through Vietnam, down through South Vietnam.
Now, how long were you in Vietnam?
I was there for about 12 months, 25 days, and 13 and a half hours.
Oh, you have it down to the minute?
I'm kidding. It was about 12 months and 25 days, I think, was our standard tour, yeah.
But you were mainly stationed behind the lines.
Yeah, I was in Da Nang, and Da Nang by then was quite safe until after the Tet Offensive. All things changed after the Tet Offensive, but when I was there, with the exception of one weekend, we were quite safe. So.
Well, I know that the French, they had a heavy hand. They were heavy-handed in how they dealt with their leadership and their governmental influence over the country.
They were very much a colonial power.
Power.
The French were the power. Vietnam was one of the, it was actually called French Indochina.
Because
And
I
it wasn't
know
just-
in the second half we're going to go into that you went into several of the museums. And so that really left kind of an influence on your life. Well, what I'm going to go into now is my pearls of wisdom. I'm going to do this a little bit early. There's a few things I want to talk to you all about. I'm still continuing the open enrollment on your insurance is still open. And I have mentioned it to you on the last show that last year I did a show with SCORE, which is a help. Somebody will help you sort out all your different needs between your medication and the type of disability that you might have to get a secondary policy. But the SCORE people that help you, actually, they go onto Medicare's site, and that you can just go on yourself to Medicare.org, and if you submit all your prescriptions and all the type of doctors you have, that they will give you comparative insurance plans. And I know I mentioned it before that our webmaster who handles our website, he went on for him and his wife, and he went through all the comparative values, and he found that he saved himself about $2,000. So it's really worth it to check it out. Okay, that's the first tip I wanted to give you. The next tip I wanted to give you is this. As a big working body of seniors, and we are a big working body, we're a big voting body. I know when I started the show in 2000, seniors were considered to be a minority, but now we're in the mainstream of things, and because due to technology and due to the advances that we have in medicine, we're just living a lot longer. So we're a bigger body, an active body of people. So you can go on, and I know that our insurance companies don't notify us of everything, but there's several discounts that one could get, like how much you drive, how far you drive, what kind of a safe driver are you. That if you go online, there's several websites that if you put in all the information that they're asking you, they'll come up with comparative things and what your discounts are. And in some cases, maybe you want to change insurance companies, but in many cases, if you find out what these available discounts are and you call your insurance company will allow you to have that discount if you remind them of it. So that's a good thing to go after. And another thing I want to mention to you briefly is if you go onto our website, you'll come onto homepage and it will tell you all the different places in which the show is seen. It's over 100 and some. I haven't got the exact count of communities that were seen in the times. But also what I have online is at this time, I think it's over 90 shows online on all different subjects. So I know many of these subjects can benefit you because it is explaining a program that is available for you for your benefit. So go online and check out all the different shows will pop up and what the show is about, and that you can pick out, and I know that'll be a benefit to you. Now, if anybody is interested in some idea for the show, or you feel that you have something that is of interest for our family of seniors in our communities that we're seeing, you can contact me. You can email me at vitaverden@comcast.net. You can call me at area code 847-573-1233. Okay, that's my information for today. Now let's go back to Vietnam. Okay, now we've come up to the place of going back to Vietnam. Now we have that you've come out of Vietnam. Now let's go back. So when did you decide to do that now?
I first decided to go back when my buddy, who had a very different experience in Vietnam, fighting for his life every day out in Khe Sanh. He was getting older and getting more infirm. But I began to feel the urge to see if I could help him to confront some of his demons.
Okay.
And by the time I had the courage to ask him that, he was too old. He was having too much trouble physically, and he didn't feel he was up to it anymore, which I found sad. I was sad that I waited so long. I'm not sure that he really wanted to confront his demons, so it might not have happened anyhow. But that was kind of my first thought about going back. Well, unfortunately, he passed away a few years after that. But I didn't stop thinking about what would it be like to go back. Could I find the base that I was stationed at? What's just as a tourist, what's it like? What's Vietnam like today?
Okay.
And so I began what turned out to be a 7.5-week trip through the South Pacific, where Vietnam was about 2 weeks of the 7. And on most of the trip, I had planned all my own logistics, my own air travel, my own hotels, because virtually all of it was English. But my experience with Vietnam was the language is difficult even when they speak English. I knew that the logistics and all the cities had all changed drastically, and I didn't feel comfortable trying to do my own planning for that. So I finally found a tour guide. He was a former Marine. He was in Vietnam about the same time I was. He had gone back to Vietnam in 1997 and married a Vietnamese woman, and he'd been conducting tours for 20 years. And so I told him what I wanted. I don't want a military, I don't want to track the military war. I want to do tourist things. I want to see Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City today. I want to see and explore Da Nang more, and I want to get to Hanoi.
Did many military people go back because it was a cheaper way of life?
Yes, that was one of the fun things about my trip back.
It's economical.
Yes, one of the things that happened was he took care of my logistics in Saigon and Hanoi.
And he spoke English.
And he spoke English. His wife spoke English. In fact, she was kind of the tour organizer for a lot of this. But when we were in Vietnam, he and his wife were actually driving me around most of the time. And we saw a lot of different parts of Vietnam. But one of the fun things was there's a large expatriate population from America, former soldiers, most of them, former military, not all soldiers. But they've moved over there because the costs in Vietnam are so economical. They've frequently married Vietnamese women. So I went one time, we were out having a party at a beach bar on the shore in Da Nang. Another time we went to a neighborhood party where we had probably 10 couples, many Vietnamese wives there. The interesting part was I got the sense that many of the Vietnamese wives and their husbands had a hard time communicating because the men spoke English. The Vietnamese wives didn't understand as much English. So it was kind of interesting to see how they interacted with each other. But that kind of gave it a very personal and local touch to the visit.
Do they have many museums over there about the war?
Yes, they have a lot of museums over there. So I went to one, they call them war museums. I went to one in Saigon, and I have trouble saying Ho Chi Minh City. It's still Saigon to me. It's kind of like the Sears Tower is still the Sears Tower downtown.
Yeah, it holds on to its original name.
That's what it was there. But there's one in Saigon. There's also one in Hanoi. And
I bet the French, they have the bigger museums.
Well, it's all one museum.
It's
in
all
each
one
case.
museum.
But what surprised me was the American War, which is what they call our Vietnam War.
Okay.
They call it the American War. And the American War was only 10 years. And the French occupied...
Was 100 years.
100
so
years.
That was a lot
And the
more
French
dramatic.
were were very overbearing, domineering, and cruel. So they treated the Vietnamese as colonial second citizens. The most impressive part of that was the Hanoi Hilton, which was where John McCain and many of the other American pilots were imprisoned. The Hanoi Hilton had one room of displays about American pilots and about American prisoners. The rest of the museum was about the French use of the Hanoi Hilton. It was a French prison. And it was very brutal to the Vietnamese.
Well, I know that the Ken Burns series kind of opened up your idea, your opinion, let's say, on some of the memories that you have. Now, going back, did that influence you in another way?
Yes, it did.
Could you explain that to us?
First off, I even asked about this a couple of times about Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was the North Vietnamese leader when we were there. He died during the war, but
that's the one they called Father, right? Was that Ho Chi Minh?
That was Ho Chi Minh. Yeah.
Okay, but he didn't have any sons.
I don't think he had any children in the leadership.
Okay.
He had his own leadership, second in command and things. And they were more hardline than he was probably, but they were all intent on unifying Vietnam. The North Vietnamese intent, while they took a communist approach to it, the real focus was unifying Vietnam. The French had sort of
when
divided.
When you say unify, is that like a lockstep kind of thing? Or is that too harsh?
That's too harsh.
Okay.
I think that's too harsh.
Okay.
And once we finally left in the early 70s, Vietnam did unify. Obviously, it's all the same flag. The DMZ now is just kind of a monument.
Okay.
There is a monument there that the North Vietnamese put up, but it's sort of a war monument to the war. I discovered that they were a little hesitant to let people take pictures of this monument and the area around the DMZ itself. But other than that, culturally, they have moved much closer together. If you read books of people who are more insightful and have more experience than I do, the Hanoi and the North Vietnamese area is still moving more slowly towards commercialism, democratic economics than Saigon is. But I found that both Hanoi and Saigon were enormously commercial, alive and well and vital. I was really impressed in Hanoi about, found one restaurant where I got to talking to the owner, who was Vietnamese, North Vietnamese, and he was hiring and training struggling Vietnamese young people. So they were teenagers, older teenagers probably.
And
but
he was training them in cuisine, in restaurant training?
Yes, he was teaching them how to be
chefs. More than being a dishwasher.
Not just to be a dishwasher, not just to do minimum wage. He was actually training them in the restaurant business. So they actually moved around in there. They would become a chef for a while, and then they would become a wait person for a while, and then I think they also had them doing kind of the back rooms, accounting and
well,
paperwork.
I think that that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing, to educate the people and train the people and not just leave them stranded there to pick yourself up by your bootstraps.
Absolutely.
Now, there's one other area I'd like to go into that we haven't really explored is back here in the States, there was so much social unrest about this war. There was such protests going on.
Yeah, it started after I came back, I think. I didn't notice anything. When I came back, first partly I came back as an individual. I didn't come back as a unit, but I came back in uniform. I landed in California. I traveled to Chicago. My wife was in Chicago.
Okay.
It was right at Christmas time. I needed a job. We decided to look in Chicago for a job. And I noticed no issues about looking for work. There was no protest yet happening. There was much more. We were beginning to see more evidence of the social unrest for the black challenges rather than the Vietnamese War at that time.
At that time.
At that time. Now, what happened was during 1968 and probably 69, more and more of the unrest moved towards the war, how wrong it was. We had lots of pictures of killings in Vietnam because...
Well, we talked about the one picture that became monumental. Maybe you could go into a little bit of that.
Yeah, to me, the monument for the unrest was the picture at Kent State, where the National Guard actually fired on the protesting students and killed one woman, and there was another woman kneeling over her and kind of hysterically shouting.
Yeah, but it was
screaming.
Kent State, right.
It was at Kent State, yeah, and that wasn't too long after. That was like late 1968, if I remember correctly.
That was close in there.
Yeah. And Ken Burns brought that up. But that was really kind of the beginning of where we found major conflict, and then it grew from students to the general public. And it grew to the streets, and it was not just the students. It was a lot of people who said, why are we there? What's the significance of Vietnam to the U.S.? And by that time, of course, we were trapped inside Vietnam. From a political point of view, we were trapped because we had made so many commitments to protect South Vietnam.
I know that you do not see going back to Vietnam as closure. You saw that rather as an opening to show, to see, to understand the culture.
Yeah.
You got into the culture.
I did. One fun picture that unfortunately my camera was in my lap, not at my eye, but I was taking a cyclo ride through Saigon. Well, I've forgotten whether it was Saigon or Hanoi. I have to go back and remember. But a cyclo is a bicycle with a seat on the front for two people, and the driver, Vietnamese driver, is pedaling behind. So you're pedaling through the city. I'm sitting in the front seat. We come up to a very busy intersection, and I'm staring into the chrome grille of a Hummer, a great big Hummer car.
They are big.
and they are big, and this
they
big
got
chrome
big
grille
tires.
and big tires, and it was it was a bright red. And I wish I'd had a picture of me sitting down in this little seat down on the ground with a bicycle,
running, and
staring at the grill of the Hummer.
Yeah.
But that was, the downtown in both areas are enormously busy. Looking at Ken Burns, I guess my picture of the number of motorcycles and things back when I was there originally, maybe I underestimated how many. I visualized more bicycles rather than motorcycles and motorbikes. But both Saigon and Hanoi, the best advice I got was from a British tourist early in my trip, where I was trying to cross a busy intersection, and this British couple said, walk slowly and just keep on walking. They'll go around you. That was the best advice I could ever get in Vietnam.
Oh, that's so interesting. Well, I'm so glad that you could come and share these warm moments, because we don't often get this personal description of somebody. We just see the flashes that come before us. So we wish all the veterans out there the best. Yeah, our heart is with them, and we know that the best is yet to come. And when you out there come to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on, because the best is yet to come. And what we want you all to do this week with Veterans Day, we do love you, is catch the spirit
and fly the flag.